Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Professor Hamamoto, and the date is December 22nd, year 2024. It's almost New Year's. Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays. It's 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and today I have a special holiday treat. I've been working on this project for a few weeks, but I've figured out how to encapsulate a very complex set of observations and recent discoveries. Well, the discoveries aren't recent, but the synthesis is fairly new, and it is found in this book right here, which is listed below as an Amazon affiliate link. It's titled Bombshell, and that it is. The subtitle is, and this is the incendiary part of the bomb. Subtitle is The Night Bobby Kennedy Killed Marilyn Monroe. Wow. I was astounded by the boldness of the assertion. And you can bet that I went through this manuscript, this book, very carefully multiple times. And I'm still missing some connections here, and I learned quite a bit. And I'll tell you at the outset that I think his hypothesis, that is the hypothesis of Mike Rothmiller, he's one of two co-authors, the other being Douglas Thompson. But it's Mike Rothmiller, who was 10 years at the Los Angeles Police Department, half of which was spent as a detective in the Organized Crime Investigative Division, which is this, just to put it in layman's terms, the spy component of the LAPD. And all the major metropolitan, not to make it any worse than it is, all the major metropolitan police departments have them. And the LAPD was one of the pioneers in this. And as it turns out, we're learning over the past several years in particular, thanks to insiders like Detective retired Mike Rothmiller, the skullduggery, to put it lightly, that takes place behind the scenes of seemingly routine police work. Yes, according to their motto that I think is painted on the side of the patrol cars, to serve and to protect. Yes, there's a lot of serving and protecting, but the other component of the LAPD is spying. And you're saying, okay, well, there's a lot of terrorists running out there, potential crazy people. That's not who I'm talking about. That's not who Rothmiller's talking about. He is speaking about the 20 to 30,000 people. When he first joined the OCID, the Organized Crime Investigative Division, he estimates about 20 to 30,000 documents or files, separate files, were being kept on non-criminals, not just in Los Angeles, but across the country, and even foreign dignitaries were under close scrutiny and surveillance. And this would include the two Kennedy brothers, John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy. And I'm going to try to avoid going into some of the familiar ground that we've heard over and over. And there's a problem with that. We become inured to differences. And plus, a lot of us, and I can see in the comments here, have already made up our minds so far as what we think we know about a given topic, including the death of Marilyn Monroe. So I'm asking you to suspend your disbelief for the next 60 minutes or so and reevaluate your understanding of the Marilyn Monroe death. Because certainly I approached this book with a great deal of skepticism, but by the time I was finished, I'm fairly convinced that the scenario played out the way Rothmiller and Thompson depicts in this book. And it's fairly new. It's 2021 publication, I believe. So that's a recent book. And I could not find any interviews with Douglas Thompson. There's a few interviews with Mike Rothmiller himself, available, but they're devoted to his previous books primarily, not this one here. And there's been some book reviews that I've read, print reviews. You have to go to print if you want to find the more incisive reviews. There is still a use for print journalism, ladies and gentlemen. Don't get everything you think you need from TubeView. It's probably one of the worst so far as critical reviews are concerned. But I could find nothing with Detective Rothmiller on TubeView because I thought, you'd get a sort of a feel for him by looking at him and hearing his words. But you can check his other work. In fact, I do recall reading his first book. This is back in the early 90s, and he's written many subsequent to that. But his was the first book that, at least that I'm aware of, that was written by an LAPD insider. Right, as I told you, he was a 10-year veteran. And that's unusual because there is a code of silence. In the Sicilian mafia, there's what's called omertà, right? The code of silence. Well, professional groups have their own version of omertà, and certainly the LAPD has them. In addition to that, so we owe a debt of gratitude to individuals like Detective Rothmiller for coming forth. And this is before the big days of the social media. I'm talking about early 90s and before even TubeView. So he kind of laid the groundwork for the explosion, keeping in that theme of bombshell, right? The explosion of so-called true crime that has inundated, has flooded TubeView and media in general. That's good and it's bad. It's the top draw so far as the genres are concerned in podcasts, and Amazon is really investing a lot in so-called true crime. But the problem is that a lot of it has become trivialized. And worse yet is that we have now a public who thinks they know more than they actually do. Oh, yeah, I got that. I used to get this a lot in early days when I first started this channel 4 years ago, when I would talk about certain topics that the know-it-alls thought they had it because they read a book by some guy on YouTube or some other channel. Somebody who's knows all about the Archons and the Anunnaki and Nibiru, or some sort of Gnostic insights. Of course, they have no language ability. They've never studied ancient Hebrew, classical Greek. Most of them are self-taught, and I'm not denigrating that. There is room for the autodidact, but I'm only telling you this is because I do not want to be lumped in with these characters. I'm very adamant about that. And I don't want to be lumped in with the pop-up pundits. They're good for what they're worth, that is, in introducing newbies and also camp followers on what they already think they knew. But so far as breaking new ground, sorry to say, but that comes out of the academic world. You have to have scholarly training to be able to understand the value, the deep value of such work as done by Detective Mike Rothmiller. And one chief criterion is a dependence on documentation. You have all kinds of pop-up pundits blowing smoke out of their patootie. Not only is it they're copying other people, it's a giant echo chamber, right? It's like the third, sixth, seventh, eighth generation of a document that's been copied on a Xerox machine. Remember those? That's what it's like. That's right. And this is not an advertisement for myself. I'm just trying to distinguish real research, real work, real insights versus the phony stuff that we're being treated to here purposely. I think the field is being purposely inundated with dreck, another very important Yiddish word to put in your lexicon. Look it up. All right. And so far as Sonius is concerned, I'm going to conclude this talk here where Marilyn is being updated. Not Marilyn Monroe, the living, breathing figure, but Marilyn Monroe, the myth, in the Levi-Straussian sense, in the Barthian sense of myth, not being fake or made up, by myth, in that it is a totem of sorts through which people think and understand the world around them, the society, the culture, and even the political system. That's a totem. That's a person who's entered into the mythological realm of our civic knowledge. That's Marilyn Monroe for sure. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Whatever you might think about her as a person or the impact of her career, and same with other celebrities, right? You can apply the same premises here. But I'm going to be concluding with again, reinforcing some ideas that I introduced in previous talks here on TubeView, which I encourage you to check out, especially the one on P. Diddy, so-called. P. Diddy as a corporate government operation to make way for the Chat GPT information and entertainment world, right? Open AI. And as you know, recently, well, it actually was last month, a man by the name of Suchir Balacha, is it Balachir? I forgot his name already. I'm sorry. It's very recent. He was a apparent suicide. He had quit Open AI in San Francisco, and was about to spill the beans on what they're doing, which is stealing the intellectual property of generations of writers, screenwriters, including novelists, even academic writers. I assume nonfiction journalism. And I believe they are also downloading what we're experiencing as avatars. And that includes Marilyn Monroe. So there's going to be AI Marilyn Monroe in the not too distant future. Let's take a very quick look, because I'm having problems explaining this concept. So let's watch this a little bit. Done by Indian media. And it's no accident. It's India media, because it's India that's leading the way in this takeover so far as intellectual power. India and China. And I was on this years ago. This is the book, my final book I wrote at UC Davis. It's called Conservatives of Empire. I talked about this process where people from Asia have come to the US in order to bring about, from a technical standpoint, from the AI standpoint, the complete hijacking of our intellectual and creative heritage going back centuries now. That is the totalistic takeover. So if you want to check out my earlier, because I'm not interested in P. Diddy or big shot, badass gangster boy, whatever your name is, baby this, baby that. I'm not so interested in you. I'm interested in why you are being rolled out now. It's for the MGM/Amazon Studios takeover, which is located in Culver City, not Hollywood, Culver City. So check that one out. I've been working on this story here. And the Marilyn Monroe of historical purport that we're going to be talking about today fits very much into that progression. You understand? This is not just a indulgence in what we think we already know, some sort of 1950s and 60s nostalgia. This is the history of the moment, of the now, of the present. So here's what the Indians are up to.
Imagine converging with a legend from the past. Introducing Digital Marilyn, a groundbreaking creation brought to life through artificial intelligence. 60 years after her passing, Digital Marilyn makes her debut at the South of Southwest Tech Conference. With her familiar breathy voice and emotive expressions, she's ready to captivate audiences once again. Built by Soul Machines in partnership with Authentic Brands Group, Digital Marilyn is more than just a simulation. She is an opportunity to connect with the timeless icon. Every time I talk to Marilyn, it's a special feeling. You feel like you have a good relationship with an icon, said Greg Cross, CEO and co founder of Soul Machines.
We'll stop right there. Did you catch that? The CEO of the company called Soul Machine. I guess the natives are correct when they said, don't take our photo, you're stealing our soul. Right. Soul Machine. You don't think he knows this guy? I mean, he's a front man, of course, for NATO and the Pentagon and DARPA and all that. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I don't really have to check it out, but if we look into his family background, you can probably see this. But this is what Suchir Balaji was trying to tell us about. He's another insider. Like Rothmiller, he's an insider. And I'm prejudiced towards people who actually have worldly experience in what they're talking about, whatever the field is. I mean, they're not the definitive word on it. We have to supplement or complement what they're telling us with external evidence and documents. Speaking of which, I didn't finish my thought about Rothmiller's work, is that when he joined the OCID, he estimates now there are about 20 to 30,000 documents on non-criminals, right? And within that subset, he found the files on Marilyn. And he is so far the only person I know who's seen them, and he made photocopies of many of them. Some of them are reproduced in the book here in excellent photo section in this particular book by Rothmiller and Thompson. And Thompson, by the way, is an excellent author in his own right. I think he might be British because there's certain Britishisms that show up in the prose of the book. But anyway, I don't want to slight Douglas Thompson in the construction of this book, but for the sake of convenience, I'll say just Rothmiller. But he had access to all those documents, and he read them, and he found out and reveals in this book this file system with a file system within a file system. It was like a Chinese box, or I'm sorry, it's the Russian doll, the nesting doll. I think it's pronounced Matrushka. I'm getting that wrong. I'm sure you pull one open and there's another one, and it's all coded, and I can't fully understand how it's all cross-referenced. But the point is that Rothmiller went through those documents. Okay, that's already a big plus in his column for me, because that's what we do in the academic world. We look at documents. We look at first-person data. We don't do pop-up punditry. In fact, within the academic world, and I hate to keep talking about it, but that was my world for 30, 40 years, right? There's a certain disdain that we hold for journalism. And one of the most severe criticisms you could have on someone else's work is that, oh, it's journalistic. And there's a lot of good journalism out there. I never fully bought into that prejudice within the academic world. But I do understand the necessity of having documents and evidence-based research. And a lot of the dreck that's coming out there is lacking in these two or more areas. It's a 10th generation copy of a copy. So we have to periodically go back to the roots, back to the origins. My gosh, look what happened to the Holy Bible, both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, as it was being transcribed or written, recorded fairly close to the origins of, for example, Jesus Christ, and the different books, the different translations, the different iterations. And I have all kinds of pop-up pundits coming in my feed telling me about, yeah, I was in prison. I had a lot of time studying the documents, and I concluded I read my way out of Christian. I was a Christian, but I studied my way out of Christianity. No, you didn't. You're a jailbird who had a lot of time on your hands, and you did a lot of, I mean, you could probably learn a lot. But you're not adhering to the standards of science, social science, or the hard sciences. And there's much to be said for that. And I'm telling you this because I'm seeing this creeping encroachment of these characters who show up on these podcasts of 1 million people. This one, who the hell is Danny Jones? He seems to be very smart. He's very intelligent. Someone needs to check out his background. These other characters, you know that they've got all their information from Chat GPT. And I'm reading books now that have obviously the stamp of Chat GPT. And pretty soon you'll have people on TubeView to replace me, who will be a product of OpenAI. So you'll have the Professor Hamamoto avatar. For the time being, you have the flesh and blood, me. And that's one of the reasons why purposely I go on my little improvisations, my little excursions, my little regressions. I double back, right? And I flash forward and back. And I also, every once in a while, throw in something utterly off the wall. That fools, at least temporarily, until they teach themselves, quote unquote, teach themselves how to follow my patterns. AI, right? So I'm dicking with the machine. I'm dicking with Alexa. This is what you're seeing. So don't complain with, oh, get to the point. Tell us about who killed Marilyn, right? If you want that, then watch one of the Chat GPT inflected hosts. Watch Joe Rogan. I'm sure most of his material is drawn from Chat GPT by now. And you won't know the difference. Just like most of us can't tell the difference between debased chemical foods. Thank goodness we have RFK Jr., who's going to be riding herd on Big Pharma and Big Agra, which are one and the same. I hope he does it. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt. And it's synthetic. So why can't our knowledge be synthetic? Why can it not be also genetically modified intellectually? So one of the reasons why I do this is to stave off the encroachment of Chat GPT into these live casts. All right. So with that, let me just go right to it, because you're probably saying, oh my gosh, can't this guy ever get to the punchline? According to Rothmiller, the book, I read you the subtitle, Robert F. Kennedy, Attorney General of the United States of America at the time, was the one he accuses of killing Marilyn Monroe. That's explosive. Furthermore, the actor Peter Lawford was in attendance when it went down. And we know by now, and this information wasn't available when people like, let's say, Anthony Summers was doing his work on Marilyn Monroe. It appeared, published, the first edition, Goddess. It was republished, and I think in a revised edition in 2013, again called Goddess. And then Netflix, which is directly linked to this national security state DARPA complex that I already alluded to. They did a whole series. I think they did a two-parter on, I saw it anyway, however many parts it was, on Netflix back in 2022. And I was very disappointed. So they must have got to Anthony Summers. He's an Irish author who up to then I thought that was a definitive book on Marilyn Monroe's death, her life and her death. But Rothmiller goes far beyond that. And I think he exceeds the pioneering work of Anthony Summers. And there were people before Summers even. In fact, Rothmiller gives a predecessor of his on the, I think he was a FBI was his branch, who in 1964, very soon after the Marilyn Monroe death, she died in August 1962, wrote a book, Who Killed Marilyn Monroe? Something along those lines. I'd really like to get a hold of that manuscript because J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI at the time, according to Rothmiller, bought all the copies and he suppressed it and was able to use that information for his own blackmail and extortion operation. So this type of literature has been out there. It's been kind of lost to the edges. It's been overwritten by people like Anthony Summers and others who have shaded the truth for whatever ends we'll have to determine, right? Is Summers related to MI5? I don't know. What's his family background? Does he come from a line of literary people who don't seem to have any visible means of support? Questions like this you have to ask yourself, right? So for those of you who just want to go and find out what the punchline is, so you can leave the cast and miss out on all the other tidbits that I have to offer. They're more than tidbits. They're revelatory in some cases. More than that, I would like to add some local flavor because I'm very familiar with that part of the world down in LA and Orange County and up through Northern California. When I say Northern California, I'll go as far north as the Bay Area, although I've spent quite a bit of time in Northern California, Redding and beyond, right? So here is where Marilyn Monroe lived and where she died. Well, it is not coming up. It's an aerial shot. I might have to remove this and add it to the stage. Yeah, it's not coming up again. But the point is that this is in Brentwood, an exclusive area, a wealthy area full of professionals. In fact, her own psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, lived nearby. And I'll remove that to the studio. I may be suffering from a memory overload in my program here. And this is where Eunice Murray, this is something I learned from the book. Eunice Murray was her 24-hour-a-day housekeeper. As it turns out, she was selected by Dr. Ralph Greenson himself to be Marilyn's minder. Technically, she was the housekeeper, right? But she was spying on her. And the reason I mentioned Greenson, and we'll get to him in a moment, he's a very important figure here. And this is one area, by the way, where I don't really see it the way Rothmiller and Douglas Thompson see it, right? I think he was at least partially responsible for the circumstances leading up to her death. He might not necessarily have been present, but he certainly was cognizant of the danger she was running with all the prescription drugs that he was administering her. So we talked about the documents. One other important element that Rothmiller has over the others is that he was able to exact a face-to-face confession from the actor Peter Lawford, who is a key member of the so-called Rat Pack. Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Joey Bishop, and people of that ilk. They've been lionized. They also have entered into the realm of myth, right? He was in Ocean's 11, the original Ocean's 11, the good Ocean's 11. Well, the second one was not bad, the remake. But that was Peter Lawford. Most of you who are of my age know him from watching a lot of television reruns. The younger ones, well, you might not see him as an important actor. He wasn't an actor's actor, but he was a workman. He was a craftsman, so far as saying. He's British. And he married into the Kennedy family, which by this time had become the first family of America through the election of John F. Kennedy. Let me see if I can get this video working about Peter Lawford.
Peter Lawford, the dapper actor known for his charm and sophistication on the big screen and stage, led a life that was as complex as it was glamorous. With his good looks and quick wit, Lawford was a favorite among audiences and a central figure in two of the most famous social groups of his time, the Kennedy Clan and the Rat Pack. But behind the scenes, the actor struggled with insecurities and personal demons that threatened to overshadow his success. Despite his struggles, Lawford remained a beloved figure in Hollywood, known for his classic films and memorable performances. Delving into the life of this troubled yet talented star, we uncover a tale of ambition, glamour, and personal turmoil that is as captivating as any of his on-screen roles. Join us as we explore the ups and downs of Peter Lawford's life.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Rat Pack. I saw Joey Bishop. He used to have his own television show called The Joey Bishop Show. And I ran into him once at the Newport Center. I was going to grad school at the University of California, Irvine. That's where I got my doctorate. So I used to go to called Fashion Island, but we called it Fascist Island. That's where all the elite from Laguna Beach, Balboa Island, and Newport Beach, that's where they went shopping. And there were movie theaters. And I saw Joey Bishop there. I forgot. I think it was, I can't remember the name of the movie. That's not important. I had many brushes with quote unquote celebrity. Okay. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is a overhead shot of the Peter Lawford estate. And I don't know if I mentioned already, but he was married to one of the Kennedy daughters, Patricia Lawford, right? By the way, I also read somewhere else that the Lawford family, his parents, weren't really thrilled about him marrying an Irish one because of the historical tensions, let's say. Talk about genocide. Wow. Talk about mass murder, starvation, famine induced by a hostile force, right? We're talking about English versus Irish. So there's, even back in the 50s when they got married, there was still a lot of prejudice against Irish, and of course, by extension, Irish Americans on the part of British people or English people, let's say. So, but anyway, he came to America, and this is not in the book, but Peter Lawford was part of this Anglo-American actor, creative directors, screenwriter, musicians, composer exchange that has been happening in quote unquote Hollywood almost from the very beginning. Hollywood has always been an arm of British Imperium, and Lawford was sort of the handsome, debonair face of that cultural imperium. Here's his home in Santa Monica, California.
Well, this is a favorite of mine. Now, excuse please the somewhat setting sun and the traffic noise, but this is about as close as I can get with a really good view, with any view actually, to the former home of Peter Lawford. one of the Rat Pack and former brother-in-law to John F. Kennedy and to Robert F. Kennedy and to Edward Kennedy and all the Kennedys. Anyway, yeah, if I got it from the beach side, you wouldn't see nearly this much.
Now, if you're driving, I think that's Pacific Coast Highway that goes right. I'm sure I've been by that compound many, many times, but you can't see anything from street level. I don't know if this guy got a telephoto lens and went on a hill or something, or an apartment overlooking PCH. And right behind is an expanse of sand. That is the Pacific Coast, ladies and gentlemen. There's a little concrete walkway. It's not a boardwalk, it's concrete right behind there. And a little bit further, and you're in the ocean. You're in the Pacific Ocean, right? Hollywood faces Asia. And Asia's full of yellow people like me. Isn't that incredible? You have this whole intellectual, creative, technical community facing Asia, and there's so much little mention of it. Very little what little representation there is not very flattering, is it? That's why it's always intrigued me. Not only that, it's also because my father was a landscape contractor, and he was able to go behind these walls, landscaping these people's homes. Celebrities, movie stars, directors, producers, capitalists. That was my dad, Joel Koichi Hamamoto, who had his shop. It's called Nisei. It's a second generation garden center in South Central Los Angeles, right on Exposition Boulevard, not far from the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum or the University of Southern California. But he'd go up in these communities like Brentwood and completely redo their homes, and they could afford it. So he made a pretty good living. And the point is that as a boy, he used to take me to these places. I was able to see a way of life that most people are left out on the sidewalk just thinking about or seeing in the movies. I got to go behind the scenes, and in some cases go inside the homes and play with the children of the house. Right? They wanted to play with me. I was just a kid like them. And I saw the maids, I saw the servants, I saw a way of life that I only thought existed in the movies. So maybe that was transformative for me, or it was revelatory for me as a boy, seeing this, living in the ghetto, but also seeing how the wealthy and the privileged lived in the LA movie colony. And then years later, as I told you, I taught film. I was in the film department at UCLA for 1 year before they kicked me out. Why? Because I wanted to study the real Hollywood, not this theoretical business that they were pushing out back then. Just before DEI and GLBT, there was already queer cinema theory was already starting to come out, but I wanted to find out about the dark side of the film business that I'm doing now. So they got rid of me. That's another story, which I'll return to later, because it so happened that when I was teaching there, that was also the year of the Los Angeles riots, 1992. And that's when another character in the Rothmiller book met his end. He finally had to resign. I'm talking about LAPD Chief Daryl Gates. He started out as the driver to his predecessor. I think it was William Parker. The main police station in LA is called Parker Center. It's downtown Los Angeles, within little walking distance of Little Tokyo. That's the Japanese American enclave, which has now been overrun by a bunch of weeaboos and tourists. But back then it was the ghetto. You understand? Because we couldn't live nowhere else. We was ostracized. There was called segregation, right? So that was Little Tokyo. And you can still probably sense the residual resentment I have with the weeaboos coming in there and stocking up on their Hello Kitty and getting their gear together for their trip to Harajuku in Tokyo. And they can do their cosplay and play their little anime big boy games or Game Boys, right? So we're talking about the 1950s, right? When we were still being spit on. This is before Japan rose out of the dust, out of the ashes. Okay, that's my history. All right. So that's Peter Lawford's spread, Patricia, and the dark secret that this narrator is alluding to is that he's bisexual. He's actually gay. Patricia Lawford, Patricia Kennedy, was his beard. But his role in this was that he helped to facilitate these liaisons between Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy at this Malibu pad. They had other places where they would have sex orgies and parties out in the valley, Encino, you name it. Sometimes they go down to Palm Springs. Frank Sinatra, that part of the Rat Pack was down there south of L.A. But the Lawford residence was one of the main ones. For one thing, it's pretty close to LA International Airport. They could come in. You could see that the entrance is fairly private, secluded. There's no neighbors in the back. Their neighbors in the back is the Pacific Ocean. They're the neighbors to yellow people thousands of miles away. And of course, back then there were no cell phones, and there weren't really what we would know today as a paparazzi. Paparazzi started coming out in the 60s and 70s. Nowadays, they have people camped out permanently at the clubs, and you know the situation. So the next clip I wanted to show you is, let's see here. Oh, yes. I have queued up here a little bit of vintage documentary footage about the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? And the reason I put this in here is because Rothmiller and Thompson do an excellent job in, believe it or not, integrating the whole geopolitical goings on, the tensions, the international tensions that were threatening all-out nuclear war. It was much worse then, and I know I lived through it, than it is now, where most people are walking around in today's and oblivious to the current nuclear war potential, right? But I put this in here because Rothmiller and Thompson remind us that Marilyn Monroe, through RFK and JFK, was privy to the deepest, darkest secrets of these Cold War tensions. And he also reveals a good deal of insight into RFK. Now, the mythology that we were taught and all the documentaries that came down the books was that JFK was at his desk. We saw the photos, the black and white, high contrast photos, official photos showing him deeply pondering the fate of humanity if the Russians didn't back down and remove their missiles from the island of Cuba. And you know the old mafia, the CIA relationship there, so I don't have to go into it. But in truth, it was Bobby Kennedy who was really overseeing this crisis. He was Attorney General. And he was the worst possible person, temperamentally and experientially, to be put in such a position as this. He had a super hot temper. His own brother, John Kennedy, referred to him as Black Bobby because he would have these black moods, these dark outbursts, violent sometimes. And he's very impulsive. And here's a guy who was right up there, close to the nuclear trigger. That's not to say that the Joint Chiefs of Staff and Joint Chiefs of Chaff, that's a good one. That's a purposeful Freudian slippage there. The Joint Chiefs of Chaff. Write that one down. P. Diddy. Don't steal my rhymes, okay? So let's take a very quick look here. I don't want to belabor the point.
October 1962. America's defense muscle heads for Florida after President Kennedy's announcement of the weapons blockade of Cuba. Truck convoys roll through Miami, one after another. Then the trains came, 150 cars in length, loaded with troops, tanks, artillery, anti-aircraft missiles. The United States was in the middle of the biggest peacetime military buildup in its history. Many people thought we were at the brink of war, but there was no panic. In Florida, at least, it was clear the president had public opinion behind him. Key West, a quiet tourist retreat, the southernmost city in the continental United States, became a gigantic military camp. The naval base empty, the ships at sea enforcing that blockade. The city only 90 miles from Cuba. The destroyers didn't have far to go. The truck convoys rumbled down the overseas highway, US 1, from Miami to the Keys.
Well, you get a sort of an idea on the tensions that were being built there, and they were very real. I was a child, of course, but most people of my generation remember the routine. I think every month we were doing these exercises that the siren would go off and everybody would hit the deck and jump under the desk and cover your eyes and your neck for imminent nuclear attack. We lived under that type of pressure daily. And if you watch the television of the 60s, there's no trace of it. It was the reverse of what was going on in the household. Everybody was scared. Right? And I'm sure the social scientists were taking down the information and seeing how they could use it into the future. Let's say maybe 2020, and they can come up with another scare. This time it wasn't going to be wearing a beard and speak Espanol. This time would be a little creature, supposedly, with little spikes on it. And it's going to kill you unless you submit to the new regime, right? And then there was Daryl Gates, who I said was tutored by couple of the early architects of the OCID, which was, I think, founded in 1957, very early on. And he got all the secrets that the chief passed on to him as his driver. He heard everything. And he had the access to all the secret files. There were files upon files upon files, index cards that were cross-referencing other index cards. And a lot of them weren't even kept in headquarters. They were kept at the homes of trusted OCID officers, or in certain cases, the chief of police's home himself under lock and key in a safe. So Rothmiller somehow managed to gather up these, not all of them, but key documents from all these disparate sources and figured out the coding system, right? So while Daryl Gates was busy spying on celebrities, and it's the most unlikely, he even had a folder on dossier on Connie Chung. Does anybody remember her? Barbara Bush ruined her career in one comment, said, yeah, she muttered under her breath, that bitch. Oh, and then Connie Chung was gone. She was the CBS anchor lady. That was a powerful position, and she disappeared. She started that in LA, by the way, her first major CBS affiliate job. Connie Chung, who, by the way, as you know, if you've read my books, she was the daughter of a Taiwanese intelligence agent stationed in Washington, D.C., right? Kuomintang. She comes from intelligence. You can only find it from Professor Hamamoto because he's the only one who thinks that yellow people are worth looking at a real close level to see what secrets they can yield so far as the New World Order is concerned. So it was the same Daryl Gates who was asleep at the wheel when the LA riots broke out. Now, one writer in particular who I respect, his name's Alex Constantine. And I keep talking about the pop-up pundits. A lot of them have ripped off Alex Constantine. They plagiarize him relentlessly, but you never hear about him himself. So maybe I'll put it in the link later, but find his work and read it. He was one of the originals in this type of research. You have the pop-up pundits, your Stephen Kinzer, your Whitney Webbs. I'm talking about people who publish, who go back, Annie Jacobson, who go back and take this pioneering work and then repackage it and repurpose it for the political mood of the present. Stephen Kinzer isn't I mentioned. He wrote a decent book called Poisoner in Chief, and it was about Sidney Gottlieb, who most of you already know about because of his expertise in poisonings and chemical and LSD, MK Ultra involvement. So check that book out, but that's not original work. This is done by people, the original work is done by people like John Marks. Start with In Search of the Manchurian Candidate, right? Kinzer came along and became a pop historian of the national security state, the New World Order. So, right, these are people who I also put in the category of the pop-up pundit. They're way after the fact, and they're putting their particular spin on it, right? The reason I mention that is because Robert Kennedy would have had access to this type of technology, poisons, such that Sidney Gottlieb perfected this for the CIA. And Marilyn Monroe officially was declared to have died by accidental overdose of barbiturates. But Rothmiller and Thompson are saying that they don't name what the substance is, but they claim that she was poisoned. And a good candidate for that would be ricin, R-I-C-I-N, it's spelled. There are many case studies. I've checked some out. And I know one true crime story down in, I think it was San Diego. A woman named Betty Broderick slowly killed her physician/attorney husband with increasing doses of rice. She was poisoning him, I think it was, if I recall correctly. But you can check that out. But there were now that we know today, chemicals available that could cause fairly rapid death, that of the sort that we saw in the case of Marilyn Monroe. Okay, so I talked about the documents, I talked about the confession of Peter Lawford face-to-face to Detective Mike Rothmiller. And the third compelling piece of evidence, fact-based evidence, are tape recordings, which he claims to have heard, Rothmiller. So I'll take him for his word for the sake of argument. And on the basis of other work I've read, such as the previous one, 3 weeks ago maybe, on The Fixer, Fred Otash. Remember the talk I gave on that private investigator by the name of Fred Otash, who was also, by the way, an ex-LAPD. When I say ex, I don't think they fully severed their ties with these entities. But Otash bugged Marilyn's home. He also bugged Peter Lawford's home, the one we saw just a few minutes ago. And he had all those tapes. But after Marilyn died, for him to have have that kind of evidence would have been a death sentence for Fred Otash. It also would have meant death for people like Rothmiller who were privy to this knowledge. Most of the, I think, well, all the principals now are dead. Rothmiller's still around, although there has been at least one attack on his life. I think he had moved down to Orange County, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's just south of LA. It's within commuting distance, and it's a hell of a commute, but it's in the commuting distance of LA. But Rothmiller claims to have heard the actual tapes where Robert Kennedy was visiting Marilyn on the very day that she died. And that information was suppressed for years by the LAPD through a succession of chiefs, including Daryl Gates, who was the chief of police when Rothmiller was on active duty. That was suppressed. And also caught on tape was, as I alluded to earlier, was the actor Peter Lawford. They were there as she was taking her last breaths, right? And Rothmiller, when I say he, constructs a plausible scenario on how RFK was able to come in unseen, go to Peter Lawford's home, drive over to Brentwood, where her home is, or was. It's still there, although the city wanted to tear it down for a while. I think they're preserving it. And they were able to slip over there fairly quickly, and was able to get Kennedy out of there and have him fly up north, where he attended a completely different, I think it was some sort of church service, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember. But the point is, it would have been seen as him being in two places at one time. And it was possible because he flew into a helicopter and then took a plane up north and pretended nothing happened. So between those three pieces of compelling evidence, I tend to agree with the Rothmiller-Thompson hypothesis, or that it's more than a hypothesis. It's an outright claim that they are making. Now, the question arises that why is this book being more heavily reviewed, both in print and on TubeView? Why aren't they doing interviews, for example, with the media, with Entertainment Tonight, with TMZ? Pick whoever you watch, right? And one of the keys that I looked at was, okay, who published the book? It's a publisher called Gemini, which I've never heard of. It's a one-off. It's also published in the UK. Right. Even though Kennedy family influence extends to the United Kingdom, it's doubtful that an American publisher would sign this book. They wouldn't go near it. How do I know this? Because one of the other books that I reviewed in leading up to the current talk, it was called Fixer, the one on Fred Otash. Let me see here. Let me get the information exact for you. Yeah. It was a book by Josh Young and Manfred Westphal. It was The Fixer, Moguls, Mobsters, Movie Stars, and Marilyn. Right? I think I did that 3 or 4 weeks ago. And I didn't get to tell you that the authors overcame incredible hurdles that were erected by the Kennedy family and their extended network that prevented them from getting a book deal. So there are all these blocks to publication. 2020, it was a news anthology on the ABC network. It was hosted by the friendly Hugh Downs. One of the reporters was Sylvia Chase and Geraldo Rivera. I'm exaggerating his name because his real name is Gerald Rivers. He's Jewish. He's not Latino. He's not Geraldo Rivera. He's Gerald Rivers. But all that aside, I mean, he's not the first guy to anglicize. It's the first guy to Hispanicize his name, right? Pretty soon you're going to be seeing these Whitinos, taking on Latino names. Oh, I'm sorry, they're already doing that. Roone Arledge was the producer of, I guess he was the top dog at ABC. Certainly he oversaw 2020, which was part of the news division. And he put the thumbs down on that one because he's a Kennedy family friend, let's say, with quotation marks. And Jackie Kennedy still had very strong ties with the publishing world. She worked in it. In fact, she resigned from her job as a acquisitions editor because she didn't like this book that her company had acquired. It was a book about the Kennedys. So she said, I don't need this. I'll just be living off my money from my dead ex-husband, Aristotle Onassis. Yes, the shipping magnate, right? Transportation. When we talked about Kirk Kerkorian, Aristotle Onassis, Niarchos, his nemesis, all these airline guys, Pan Am, Transit, right? Howard Hughes, very important. We talked about that previously. Rose Kennedy, I think, was still alive. She was getting along in years. Ted Kennedy was very much active as a senior U.S. senator. So they weren't about to let this information go out. So this, to answer my own question, is one of the reasons why up till now you're not seeing a program devoted specifically to a review of this book, Bombshell, except for now, right? Now, technically I'm out of time, but I want to continue with one of my main quibbles, or conclude with one of the main quibbles that I have about the book, and that is that he lets Dr. Ralph Greenson off the hook. Dr. Ralph Greenson, I gave a talk on him here on TubeU on May 3rd, 2022. It's quite some time ago. It was about Marilyn Monroe and Ralph Greenson. So you might want to check that one out, right? These talks that I'm giving they're not redundant, they're not repetitive, but they're cumulative and they're accretive. So you want to look at some of the earlier. Subscribe to this channel so you can have better access. And also, if you want to support me so I can buy more books like this and this one here, Scandal at Dolphin Square. If you want to support me there, you can join my Patreon, where you'll get all kinds of interesting extras, a lot of goodies. This is a good one, by the way. Peter Lawford, who we previously talked about, he had an affair with Christine Keeler when she was a teenager. You might know her as one of the principals of the so-called Profumo scandal. Well, a lot of the hijinks for these entertainers, quote unquote, rent boys, escorts, party girls, members of parliament, judges, barristers, many of them had homes at Dolphin Square in London, or second homes, townhomes. So I'm just starting that book there. That's where I found out more. There's a whole section there on Christine Keeler. So give me some time. I'll get to this book, because we're talking about an Anglo-American operation here. It's not just American history here. This is, as you can tell by the Cuban Missile Crisis, this affected the entire world. And Marilyn Monroe was having pillow talk with two of the principals involved with that. In another book, I think it was the Summers book, Marilyn was expressed sympathy towards Castro, and she suggested that they shouldn't gang up on him. Of course, she had leftist, leftist politics herself. She was seen in some quarters as being a pinko, especially after she married Arthur Miller, the playwright, who was a leftist. They weren't married very long. He wrote The Misfits, by the way, which was the last movie that Clark Gable was in before he died of a heart attack. You have to see The Misfits. It is a classic of American cinema. It was written by our friend Arthur Miller, who was married to Marilyn. He was on set at the time, and she was so doped out she had to take a break. John Huston, the great director, he's responsible for The Misfits. And Keenan Wynn was one of the second roles, and Montgomery Clift. Oh, the role, he's another story. Montgomery Clift, he was known in Hollywood circles as the human ashtray. He was in the whole sadomasochist scene in LA. That's Montgomery Clift. So let me finish with Ralph Greenson. He did his undergraduate work at Cornell, and from there, he didn't say which institution he moved to or went to Switzerland to get his medical degree there. I want to find out. Maybe some of you researchers can help out here and find out where Dr. Ralph Greenson got his medical degree. And we have to certify if he actually ever got it. But the importance there is that if he was in Switzerland, most of you know that Switzerland was the home of Sandoz Laboratories. That was where Dr. Albert Hofmann was doing his work on lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD-25, right? I think Ralph Greenson was being trained not only in barbiturate prescriptions, but maybe even hallucinogenics. And from there, he moved to LA. There was a large group of psychiatrists with roots in New York City. I've done this sort of genealogy in previous talks. For example, in the one I did on Philip K. Dick, a lot of them came from New York. Most of them were Jews, by the way. And I talked about it as the Jewish paperclip. There was the German bad Nazi paperclip, but then there was the Jewish, which is okay, right? According to the orthodoxy paperclippers who are scientists, engineers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. And they migrated to LA, and from there migrated to places like Los Angeles, especially Beverly Hills, where Dr. Greenson had his practice, and San Francisco, which is where PKD got his mind rewired, according to my original research, from the emigre psychiatric psychoanalytic refugees from Austria and Germany. So we're talking about a global reorientation, to put it mildly, going on here, of which Marilyn Monroe is one casualty. And being in LA, Dr. Greenson was a professor of clinical psychology at the UCLA Medical School. A lot of dark money goes through that institutions. Let's talk about the Jules Stein Eye Institute at UCLA. Dr. Jules Stein, founder of the MCA, the Music Corporation of America, godfather of entertainment mafia. His main man in Hollywood was Lou Wasserman, and with his wife Edie Wasserman, where they were the straight money conduit to the Democratic Party. You want to know why a lot of libtards in Hollywood are still very much blindly obedient to the Democratic Party? It starts with Lou Wasserman. It starts with the big boys out of Chi-Town into Chicago with Dr. Jules Stein. There's a Michael Milken School of Business or endowed chair at the School of Business. I think it's called Anderson at UCLA. Michael Milken, the junk bond. UCLA, the UC system in general is it's the ideal money laundry, right? And my superiors at UC Davis did not appreciate. They weren't my superiors intellectually. They're my inferiors intellectually. I'm talking about they were the administrators who were making big bucks, by the way. You don't think you make any money in education? You're wrong. Once you get up to the provost level, you're making easy, low, mid six figures. You're like at a corporate compensation scale. Once you get into the administrative, because once you're up there hiding all these secrets and suppressing legitimate faculty, like myself, tenured, of course, that's me, fully tenured, full professor. That's how I left. Their job is to make sure that I don't tell tales out of class. So like when I was at UCLA, I couldn't talk about the dark side of Marilyn Monroe. I couldn't take a field trip of my class of 200 down to Brentwood and walk around and see Marilyn Monroe's home. And then take another walk further on and walk by the place where O.J. Simpson went on his murderous rampage, on and on and on. They don't want to hear that. So he taught at UCLA Medical School. There's other medical doctors who are involved in mind control that that I don't have to review at this time. He was also the head, if not the founder, of the Los Angeles Psychoanalytic Association. And most of you know that I have a highly skeptical view of so-called psychoanalysis, and I definitely have full skepticism about people who are in the MFCC area, family counseling, whatever it's called. Everybody in the middle class and above is on therapy, and they're trying to get the ghetto kids on therapy. If they can find a way to make it compulsory and pay, everybody is going to be assigned their own personal psychotherapist. They were doing at UC Davis. They were filling the faculty offices full of these Weasley psychoanalysts, counselors. And there was a guy named Paul Kim who came in, and I said, oh, this is the beginning of the end. They brought him in there to infiltrate the entire university. And there's one of him in all the different schools across the country. I'm telling you, this is why we're screwed up. We are the Marilyns. We are being the ones that are gaslit. We're the ones being overly medicated. Ralph Greenson, to complete my thought here, was also close to Anna Freud, who I've talked about. You might also want to check out a previous talk I gave on this sex cult in Upper Manhattan called the Sullivanians. Abstract impressionist art via critics like the great Clement Greenberg were cult members, right? The artists that we were taught to adore in undergraduate art survey courses, right? All the fecal smears on the canvases and the action painting of Jackson Pollock. And you flat earthers are still stuck on the Beatles. Come on, grow up. So Anna Freud, and of course, she's one of the founders, American division of so-called child psychology. Why do you think the children are more screwed up than ever now? Because of people like Anna Freud, the daughter of the great Dr. Sigmund Freud. It was kind of a incestuous type of father-daughter situation there. It's kind of creepy. So I think we need to radically reappraise all these different these systems of so-called therapy, which are quite the opposite. So anyway, that's my take on Ralph Greenson. That's my my major quibble, it's more than a quibble that I have with Rothmiller, and I wonder why he is so much in favor of Ralph Greenson's innocence. In fact, he refers to him as a scapegoat. And I mention this is because research, because, I've started out this talk talking about the importance of documentation, interviews, first person, not second, third, fourth hand, very evidence-based research and all this. All right. One of you, it can't be me at this point, but one of you, because I get a lot of queries directed to me about how do I become a researcher, how to become a writer. I don't have time to address your questions, which are good. I understand where you're at. I was in the same place at certain times of my life. I know the hunger, I know the drive, I know the ambition, but I can't answer your question. But I can tell you that if you want to start doing research on Ralph Greenson, you'll be doing humanity a big favor. And furthermore, Professor Hamamoto will tell you where to go to find his documents, the archive. His archives are at UCLA, special collections. So you're going to have to get a low-paying job. This is tough stuff I did, right? Or live in a cheaper neighborhood and commute, drive in daily and go to the library, special collections, get your computer right, take all the notes, and then get all that raw data, and then give us a more complete profile on who this person was, Ralph Greenson. He is deserving of a book all to himself, Ralph Greenson. I have some materials. I bought a couple of his books that were really transcribed lecturers from some of his devotees. There's almost sort of like a cult that has been built up around Dr. Ralph Greenson. And it seems to be centered down at Cal State San Diego for some reason. He has devotees there. So if you want to lead on a research topic, Dr. Ralph Greenson is your man. And the fact that he comes out of Columbia, which is the source of a lot of these early social psychological engineering programs. I know a lot of you are still locked and fixated on Tavistock Institute, Tavistock this, Tavistock that. Fine and dandy, you beetle flat earthers, you blue beamers. But you really need to check out Columbia University. And for that purpose, check out one of my earlier talks I gave on Mr. Rogers, Mr. Fred Rogers. He's a product of Columbia University child psychology. That's Mr. Rogers. He screwed up several generations, maybe 3 or 4 generations of chillins. Kindly Fred Rogers, he'd come into his little studio home, take off his outside sweater, put on his cardigan, put on his little tennis shoes, sit down, sing a song to you, and then completely creep out generations of children. That's Fred Rogers. So check that one out. And check out the child psychology establishment, of which Anna Freud was an instrumental person. And it all comes together. All right. And again, I'll conclude with my earlier observation that research like this and talks like this are important because figures like the contemporary equivalents of your Marilyn Monroes are very much in play. And they're sleeping with presidents of the United States and of the Dominican Republic, of Panama, of Malaysia, or visiting dignitaries or other form of elite deviance, as it's been called. It's still very much in play. But the big difference is that whole layer of celebrity is being thrown out by OpenAI. along with MGM/Amazon, right? Then you don't need physical flesh and blood human assets to do your dirty work. You can do all the compromising in an automated fashion. It also lowers the overhead. That's why I see it going, ladies and gentlemen. This is why you need to subscribe and support the Professor Hamamoto channel. You need to help me exceed 100,000 subscriptions by the end of next year, 2005. I'm at 47,000, nearly halfway there. I want to get that brass-plated play button and put it behind me on my wall there. So it's going to be in the shot when I give my talks to you. With that, ladies and gentlemen, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Ramadan, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year 2000. It's going to be a doozy. And God willing, I'll be here with you. I'll be here next Sunday as well. I'm not taking the holidays off. Right? I don't believe in holidays for myself. It's work. It's always work. It's beyond work. It's a mission. And I thank you for indulging me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week, God willing. Have a good week. Bye.